Good morning. Coffee and Dev live stream. Today is our great Friday. Let's just fix some of the lighting. A little bit better. All right. This is you think I would be used to doing this, but every time I get a little nervous and whatnot. Always forget to do something. It's like remove the banner. There we go. Okay. So, as I was saying, Coffee and Dev, today's Friday. It's another Friday. You get to sip on some coffee with me and learn and improve and learn something new. And hopefully, we have a great time. So, today's topic that I want to cover is books for interviews. Um, if you recall, there has been a couple, I think, videos now that I've done related to interviews. Salary negotiation and interviews for co-ops, I think, were two of the other videos that you can always find on YouTube or Twitch, wherever you're watching this from. Just Tech at Scale, look on YouTube or twitch.tv/Tech at Scale, and you can find the past broadcast and you could watch the prior ones. So, with that said, this is actually a book that I don't think a lot of people know. It is a book that I highly recommend. It's called Deep Work. It is a, it's for everyone, regardless of what you're going for, whether it's engineering manager, developer, team lead, technical lead, staff engineer. It doesn't really matter. I think I actually have the book over here, and it really focuses on getting you to do what they call deep work, and instead of like shallow work is what they call, I believe, the other type of work. So the too long didn't read, but you need to read it to fully grasp everything that they're talking about is essentially getting rid of your phone, cutting out your phone, limiting your phone, social media. It's all about making you able to focus and zoom in on just your priority, because it doesn't matter if you're sitting there doing 5 hours of work and if every 5 seconds you're like, oh, what's that notification? Oh, whatever. Context switching, for anyone who is a developer and has worked with like product management, knows that context switching is like the bane of your existence. Someone comes and taps on your shoulder, or Slack or Zooms you, I guess, in this day and age, and they're like, oh, I just have a quick question. Lie, never a quick question. It's always a trap. And then second part of this is um, the second part of this is the fact that, oh, it's going to take you like 10 minutes to get back to where you were and to figure out what you were doing. And I think there's a good XKCD comic about this, actually, which I should have had on this slide. And it shows like something like, if A is equal to B and B is set to true and B and like all this stuff. And it's like, okay, backtick equals true. And then someone's like, hey, Bob, how's your day going? And it's like, good. Okay, bye, Bob. And then the cycle just repeats. They're like, if A equals B and B is set to true. So there's always a context switch. This is really about how do you get the most out of it. I think this fellow Cal Newport is a professor, and he had some record amazing number of papers written during his time at the university or research, whatever he's doing. And he just wanted to know, it was either him or someone else he looked up to, of like, how are they able to produce so much more work? And it's not just necessarily the sheer amount of hours, because when you look at it, you could be working 12 hours, and how is this other person able to only work 8 hours and outproduce the amount of work you're doing in a higher, uh, not just quantity, but quality as well. So this is a very good book. Um, the next book is Cracking the Code Interview, which is probably this like broken. I actually don't think this is really a good book. It is a good book to recommend. I, I find it really, really boring and tedious to go through. Um, I mean, I think it just works. It's a good book to recommend now because the current system of interviewing is just total garbage, and it focuses just mostly on prime candidates who just came out comp sci. It focuses mostly on algos and data structures, and most of which we almost rarely use in our day-to-day jobs. Um, like, how many times have you had to do X? Like sorting some arbitrary thing. It's like not very often, to be honest. Like, and most of the time, I'm not doing it by hand because I know that there's already existing libraries to do that that are already providing tests and they're already covered, and I don't need to accidentally make a mistake. I can find the optimal solution and just go with that. I mean, it's good foundation because of the thinking process it has to understand like, oh, maybe this is better to use here, and oh, I know about blah, and one could argue it's about like breaking down a problem and doing steps, so that's good. uh I would honestly just say like probably can just skip the book and just get HackerRank or any of the other tools and just do a bunch of the exercises, and you would honestly get probably close to this. Now, granted, you will do very well on this book if you happen to have someone who says that this is a book that they should be using to interview. If they think, oh, we'll pick a question from this and see how well they do, and you've already prepped off of this book, and they ask something that you're able to remember. I remember someone telling me like they actually knew the most optimal solution during interview, and they pretended like they didn't, and they were like, oh, I'm going to show the worst performing way of doing this. And then when the interviewer asks me, like, is there any way you could think of doing this better? You're going to have aha moment on the spot and be like, oh, well, I thought that maybe we could use this and this and that. And you look much smarter than like, not that you actually are, but you're alluding that in that moment that you are. You already have the most optimal. You've actually backtracked and given them the dumbest answer that you possibly could come up with, and then showing that, ooh, in the span of 5 minutes, you could go from that into this most optimal solution on the spot, which I thought was funny. And that's exactly how I feel about this book. Is it's good for the exercise. It's good to prime your technical thoughts, especially if you're not normally doing a lot of coding day to day. But it's for places that are going to look for very particular sort of questions. Um, and on that note, I had someone who interviewed at who did Twitch streaming explained like when they interviewed at Fangs, actually all the questions that they got asked were not in this book or on HackerRank. Now, obviously, they couldn't say the question because of the NDA, but that just shows you like, oh, you're not going to be just read this and you're good to go to interview at like Facebook or Apple or Google. But there's a lot of pre-FANG companies that will be super biased and really heavy on this book because they think like, oh, that's exactly what Google's going to ask, therefore we should ask that. Such a terrible system. But anyone who's been a developer for a while knows this interviewing is always garbage. Rarely is it good. Systems design interview book is good for developers, DevOps, architects, going for those positions. But I think this book is vastly underrated. I think the coding book is, regardless of your job, you're able to bump into like proper data structures and algorithms for searching and whatever on a day-to-day basis, or be aware of libraries for that. This book, the System Design Interview book, is really good because if you haven't worked at a company that's dealt with problems at like substantial scale, these are probably not scenarios that you've bumped into. Like, how do you write like? I was like, let's just get the book and just give an example. Design a unique ID generator in distributed systems. Not many people will have done that unless they're working in distributed systems. So if you've been working in a company that you're able to get away with a single box, or you're not worried about collisions of IDs because it's unlikely to happen, or you're able to just call to a central source of truth because, oh, it's small scale and it's all in the same data center. But once you go into multiple data centers, now you can't call necessarily a central point of location because of the latency impact that you would get. So now you need to have this distributed system where they're able to generate unique IDs without collision across multiple data centers on different boxes with potentially different containers. So that's in that book. I think it was like chapter 6, and this was just a good example. There's plenty more. Go on Amazon, read the intro, um, like the summary, and see what problems they have, and you'll probably consider that this book is actually really good. It also gets you into the other part of interviewing, which is when you're just a developer role, especially up to about intermediate, and once you start going over to your senior level, the questions are going to also have usually a system design portion to it on more the system level stuff. How would you okay, you've written your code, but how would you deploy this, and what's your infrastructure look like, and how do you make sure that the whole system doesn't topple over? Getting into rate limiting, getting into understanding outside of your code, the more broader impact of, well, what about latency on like your storage behind that? How would we speed that up? What about caching layers, load balancers in front? How do you distribute that? What's the most optimal way of shaping your traffic so that, is it round robin? Is it based off some sort of heartbeat? Is it weighted? Like, do we care about sticky session? Do we not care about this? You start getting into those questions more on the system design. And like I said, I highly recommend this book. I think it is very well written. I think even just reading it, not for interviews, just the exercises of thinking how things are designed, like design YouTube, Google Drive, URL shortener, notification systems, rate limiters, consistent hashing. Like, these are things that for me are much more exciting than the cracking interview code book. Now, as you're moving into your progression, more your senior IC roles or your staff engineer or technical stuff, you're going to bump into more of leadership. And I also have this book and recommend it. Staff engineer, I think it is really good. It gives examples, well, stories. And the other thing is it intros first with, okay, how to basically where you are today. Let's say a high IC role. How would you get into a staff engineer? What is the way to position your promotion packets to get you there? What are steps to progress to get there? And then it walks you through different stories of people of how they were before their staff engineer, how they are as a staff engineer now, what they could do different, how they feel the experience went. So it's a mixture of here's a practical guide to answer your questions around getting there, what to watch out for, and where you are today, and then throw in real life examples of like other people who have faced this, which I think is a good balance, because even if you're already, oh, I'm already a staff engineer, why would I read this? Because you can read it for the stories and find out that, oh, wow, I can relate to other people struggling as blah, 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 or someone else wants to know how to become a staff engineer and they've asked me. And sometimes it's just luck of the game, but you might not have a solid answer, or they might have different strengths and weaknesses as you, and it's just an easy book to point someone to. Then this book, which I have, but it's in PDF format. In this book, I don't think a lot of people know because I don't think it's listed on Amazon. And I think this was a really eye-opening book when I first was like a technically going into like a software development manager role or somewhere around that timeline. And it walks you through a bunch of different things. And this is good for the interviewing books because it primes you for things that are what are going to be asked. Even on the staff engineer book, it's going to ask you things like, How would you handle someone on your team wanting to be promoted into a staff engineer? It also gets you used to speaking the same language that during the interview they would expect. So if you're applying for a staff engineer, they might be looking for somewhat unique language in how you're speaking and making sure that you're saying like um, moving the vision of the company forward and providing leadership and guidance and mentorship towards the teams while making a direction of the technical vision of where the company should be going. Day to day, personally, I rarely ever say that. In an interview, though, you say something like that, and they're like, "Oh, wow, this person understands like the impact of their role, the duties of their role, as well as the broader image of the company." So I feel like these books are really good for priming you in the mental state. The Leading Snowflakes book is good because a lot of times if I've done an interview and they're like, oh, you're applying for blah blah a manager position, and you know it will be such unique, not unique, it'll be questions that without broad, or sorry, questions without particular context, they're really hard to answer. And I feel like this book is like your checklist. You just say the exact same thing repeated over with zero actual reality of what a manager does. Um, because you'll have something be like, let's say you have someone difficult on your team, how would you handle that? And this book will just actually kind of walk you through exactly what you should do, which is good in your interview because you just repeat the exact same stuff. In reality, though, in real life, once you're hired, you realize it's never a checklist. Context matters. Like you need to walk through various things to get any sense of what to do and what not to do. Everyone's different. It depends on. So, are they disengaged? Are they engaged? Have you found out they're engaged? Are you holding one-on-ones? And a lot of times, I feel at this level, um, when you're interviewing for like a management position, like let's say SDM position, and you're being interviewed by peer, it's total garbage because at least on the developer aspect, it's binary. You either got the question right or wrong in terms of like the algorithm. Like if they ask for O of one, it's O of one, and if you give them the answer of O of one, then it's O of one. There's no argument of that. Then maybe you could argue readability, but at least you're like, okay, factually, it runs like that. The time complexity is this, and the space complexity is that. Period. There's no argument in that. But in management, it's like, oh, how would you handle blah, blah, blah? And you give an answer, and the person's like, oh, they wouldn't even do X. Oh my God. It's like, yeah, but you don't have the context. I wouldn't do X because I've already handled those during my one on ones. And I have a process in my one on ones to make sure that I don't need to check in on the person. Like, oh, you're a low performing individual. And, I haven't said it in an interview, is like, how would you handle a low performer? And you're like, um, you know, reassigned to work and check in with them and blah blah. And you skip over something that manager is like, oh my god, what a noob! They didn't. It's like, but what happens if you already have a process in place for that? Like, what happens if during your one-on-ones you already cover that? You could say, well, you should cover that in the question, but it's so hard. I feel like this book is just you just say exactly like the formal things of what this book says, and then there's no ands, buts, or ifs of like anything being left out. And that is it for Coffee and Dev today. I hope you learned something. I hope I see you next Monday or Friday. And as always, keep on drinking, keep on learning. Until next time, adios.